Jesus was a rock star. He brought the...
Repeat after me and pray this. I apologize, it's not on the screen. Just say, Jesus, help me to be what you want me to be. Do what you want me to do. Because people without you go to hell. Now, it was 1 year ago this week that the vegans attacked. Okay, do you remember that? All right. Anybody here for the vegan thing? Yeah, that was 1 year because it was. I'm about to go to the camp that I was at when it all came crashing down. When the so just they have a little thing today, and and during that time, one of the things that they accused me of is that they said, well, the media department at Rock Church, they put all this stuff together and put it out there. And yeah, there is no media department, which is kind of funny. It's like they thought we were like some big church or something, and it was like just us, and so I don't have a video. I need to come up with a video introduction for this series because this one is I couldn't find any good media to steal for this one because we are on a slow, long walk through David's life. And so we've been on David for a couple of weeks, and he's not even going to kill Goliath for another 2 weeks, okay? There's just so much in David's life. And we're on a long, slow walk through David's life. And the reason why I like David is because I can really relate with David. His failure, I can also relate with his passion and just how he loved God. And we want to take David's life, and we want to model the good stuff and take the bad stuff as a really solemn warning. Because we'll get into it later on, but David, he loses the things most important to him. I mean, he really has some bad days because of some of his failures. And so we can let that put the fear of God in us. We can take from his life the good stuff, and we can have a holy, reverent fear and say, wow, if David made those kind of mistakes, I need to be really humble, and so we'll be doing that. But today is a little different. I'm actually a little nervous about today's message, but I felt like that we should do it because it's important, but it's not quite as sexy. Can I say that in church? Apparently not. Anyway. It's not quite as cool as some other things, and because David, God's boot camp. Now, last week we talked about what God looks for in a leader. And we went through a bunch of stuff of what God is looking for in a leader. And today we're going to talk about what kind of person, what is the boot camp that God has to create the qualities that he needs in his leaders. By the way, that QR code will bring up this mind map if you so wish, but should have told you that first because now I got to make it go away. So that's how that is. David lived in a place of solitude. He was the youngest of a bunch of brothers. He was out and it was his job to take care of sheep. We're going to learn that a little later, but that's what he did. And it strikes me that a lot of major life's lessons, they're learned, the responsibilities that we have. Before we get to be in the public eye, God expects us to be faithful in the small things, to be consistent in little places. And that happens a lot of times when you're all by yourself. Because at some point in time, you will be all by yourself. All by... I want to sing that song now. Yourself. I just smudged my glasses. How irritating is that going to be for the rest of the sermon? But there's something about solitude that there's some good things. Because it's in that place that God can meet with you when it's hard. And solitude is so hard now because we just fill it with stuff. We have music on all the time. We're constantly entertained. But if you can get to a place of solitude, the thing about solitude is solitude makes you look at yourself, but there's a nourishing quality to solitude and being alone. And David had this time because he was the least important brother. He was the one that could watch the sheep. And he was the one that the others would be working and out making deals and doing things on behalf of the family. And we know that they looked down on that position because that's what his older brother would would tease him with later. Why don't you just go back and watch those sheep, David, he says. All right, when David is about to fight Goliath. And so we know that it was a low position in the family because it was scorned by the other brothers. The littlest guy on the totem pole got that. But the thing about solitude is it brings, it's through space. And we miss that. So there's no space in our lives. So many people, they need noise all the time. They got to have something happen. If in a silent place, people can get a little crazy. You know, people don't like silence. We're not used to silence. We kind of need noise. I think part of it is because when you get by yourself and you get alone with your thoughts, you begin to find out that I don't like what's inside of me. When I'm alone and I look at myself, I don't like what I see. And so we have all these unresolved conflicts that happen. These things that are cognitive dissonance inside of us. Don't we live in a culture of cognitive dissonance? Where people, they believe two opposing things. I wish I could unpack that for a while. You know, you're carrying two things that you believe is true in your head at the same time. But in quietness and solitude, all of a sudden, you're forced to confront some of these things. And the silence can become deafening. If you ever had I've had deafening silence. You're lying in bed at night, and your mind and the things you don't want in there, they're coming at you all the time. So we put on music, or we do this. But in solitude is the place where David lived, where he learned to be king. It was in that place of solitude. So one day, David was sent out to be with the sheep. And as he gets out there, he's walking down the road, and he's all by himself. And he's humming. And he's going, and when he gets up there, he finds the sheep. One was straggling away. He goes, he gets it, he brings it back. And then he's just looking, and he's looking at the sheep, and I think he says something that he said a lot, actually. Stupid sheep. These stupid sheep. I'm supposed to be down there, and I was supposed to go down there. I'm with these stupid sheep. So there he is with his stupid sheep. And the boredom brings life to some things, okay? Boredom brings life to some things. One thing he starts doing is he begins to play with a slingshot. Now, at that time, a slingshot had more use than our slingshots do, but he's got nothing better to do, so every day he just begins to do his slingshot. And then one day he begins, he had heard of God. He knew, his family was apparently religious enough that he had known God. And he begins to talk to God. And he begins to just have conversations. And we don't know when he starts doing this, but we do know that very early on he starts getting into music. So there was a day when he was there and he was humming it, and he went home and he said, "Mom, could you get me a harp?" And he asked his mom, and if you want some fun, you ever watch YouTube videos maybe of rock stars and their first guitar, and they ask how they begged their parents for it. There's a documentary on Joan Jett right now, and she talks about how her first guitar. I remember my first guitar. It was my dad's guitar. It was a Gibson, but it wasn't a Gibson Les Paul. It was an acoustic Gibson guitar, and that was my first one. I had to push the strings down so hard. I remember and he goes and he begs his mom, and his mom finally gets him a harp or a lyre or whatever you want to call it, and he totes that back out to the pasture with him, and he's just there with the sheep, and he just begins to play, and at first it's really bad, and he doesn't care though because there's nobody there, nobody's watching, nobody cares, and he begins to play his harp, and he's playing, and it's just him and the birds and the sheep. Just see if you can smell it for a minute. Here's sheep dung. There's flowers. Maybe a hummingbird. And he is playing his harp. And he begins to catch something that you can only catch it. It can't be taught. And he begins to catch just a desire and a love for God. And he begins to sing. And he begins to do it kind of loud because we know that David has got an aggressive personality. He's going to kill a lot of people, right? I mean, so he's a passionate guy. And he begins to sing and he begins to shout and he plays his harp. And so day after day, week after week, David plays his harp. He sings, and he shoots his slingshot. And he does that every day. So David's world at this time, it's peaceful and it's solitude, but it's also in a place of obscurity. Nobody is there seeing him. It's only the birds and the sheep and the poo and an occasional lion or bear, but we'll meet them later. But nobody cares that he's there. Nobody even hardly remembers that he's there. And we talked about last week that one of the things about David was that he was a servant leader. And in God's economy, not in the world's economy, not in a lot of the church's economy, because churches, we could do better. But in God's economy, servant leaders, they're unknown, they're unseen, they're unappreciated, and they're unapplauded. And it was in preparation for this, it was helping to tickle my mind just to think of all of you guys that come in early, and you just do stuff that nobody sees, nobody bothers with, unless it doesn't get done or whatever, It's unknown, it's unseen, it's unapplauded, and it's unappreciated. But there's demands on obscurity, aren't there? It's an obscurity where you're doing these little jobs every week, right? Or these little jobs every day, and you're doing this stuff, but it's during those times when it's kind of boring. I made up all of that about David because the scripture doesn't tell us much about that period of his life, does it? We just know he was there. We know that he was the one keeping the sheep, and we had to infer that. But we really don't meet David much, but we know that he was out in the woods, and we know he was playing music. We know he was playing with his slingshot. We know that. And we know that he was learning a love for God all on his own. But it's in the obscurity where character is built. It's in obscurity where character is built. Because it's in those places when David he could make a decision. Am I going to play my harp? Or am I going, play Game Boy? I don't know what the David Game Boy would be, actually. There's no Game Boy. That's 1990s. Everybody's got a phone. Nobody has Game Boy anymore. Anyway, he could have done anything, but instead he chose to do things that had a future. And inside of David's obscurity, there's not much written because it's so boring, because it was full of monotony. It was like one day was the same as the next day. It's the same as the next day. It's the same as the next day. But David was faithful in that monotony. It was menial, insignificant, regular, not spelled right, unexciting. All of these things that David, it was just boring. But David apparently was faithful in it because in God's economy, God is impressed with little things, little pieces of faithfulness, the daily tasks of life, just plain old dull life. And if now most sermons are way more fun when we preach on the day that David gets to fight Goliath. That's fun to preach on, right? It's arousing. There's a crowd. There's incredible drama. There's all kinds of stuff happening. There's lots of characters doing this and that, and it's a big, big day. But God's favorite method of training is not the big day. The way God likes to train is God likes to train you in the everyday. Okay? God is the God of the everyday. And the monotony is actually God's favorite way of training. None of the saints in the scripture avoided it. All right, David didn't avoid it. Noah didn't avoid it. He spent a generation building an ark. Look at Joseph and the years of obscurity that he had to live through. God's favorite training method is obscurity. It's faithfulness in day to day. Moses, 80 years old before he began to walk in the call that God had finally called him to. I think most of our presidential candidates are going to be 80 years old this year, by the way. But that's God's favorite way of training, is in obscurity and in the everyday. But we don't like to live in the everyday. We like to live in yesterday and tomorrow. How much of your day is spent in this moment? In the time that I've been speaking, and as, some heads go like this. I need something to throw. Anyway, Just kidding. I'm not doing that right now. But in the, crap, I lost my train of thought because I was being silly. God's favorite method. And what was the last thing I said before? Oh yeah, are you living in the tomorrow and yesterday? Thank you. All right, yesterday and today. We spend, when you go home, you're driving in your car. You're not thinking about driving, right? Your brain just kind of does that on its own. There's maybe radio playing, but you're not actually listening to the song. You're thinking about a problem you got to deal with tomorrow. You're thinking about something that somebody said to you yesterday that is still hurting. Okay? We very rarely live in the moment. Very rarely do we have periods of time when we're right in and actually scientists call it a state of flow. There's actually a book out there called Flow, and there's been a lot of science done on this. What is flow? Well, flow is when you get to a place and you lose track of time because your mind is completely engaged in something. Some of you guys are car guys, and when you go out and work on your car, you get in a state of flow, and it's just hours go by. And you know, some of you are musicians, and you'll just pick up your instrument and begin to play, and you get in a state of flow. And then all of a sudden, you're just enamored with that moment, and it goes. The things that we enjoy most in our lives are things that give us a state of flow because it's peace. I want to encourage you that God wants you to have more flow in your life. He wants you to have more of those moments where you are present. Now, one of the things that you can is that's a different sermon. But we do stuff to try to get us into flow. Actually, music is to try to get us into a state of flow. When we go into worship, my hope is that you would come in this place and that the music would happen, and all of a sudden the crowd would disappear, your yesterday would disappear, and you just get enamored with God for that moment where He has your undivided attention, and you don't have to grit your teeth to give Him your attention. You're just caught up, and you get to focus on Him for a minute. Music helps us do that, but it's in monotony that we get there, and we live in tomorrow and we live in yesterday, but we're never in today. God wants us to spend more time in every day, because if you don't challenge how you spend your everyday, your day will tell you how to spend your everyday. Okay, let's back up for just a minute. In given no intentionality from you, if you're not intentional about it, our society, more so than David's, much more so than David's, our society will pull your attention to things that are just fruitless and stupid. Your phone will beep and tell you that your game that you're playing is ready for you to continue on it. You binge watch Netflix. You will, and none of those things are evil. None of those things are bad. But the good is the enemy of the best. And for David, he got in a place where he was all by himself, and there were no distractions. When I started to play guitar years ago, I had done something that you probably shouldn't do. And I said to God, I said, Lord, if you don't want me to wrestle anymore, because one thing short guys can do is wrestle. I was really good at wrestling. And probably the only thing in the world that I was actually good at as a teenager. And Lord, but I had this Bible study in my house, and people began to backslide because I wasn't focusing on it. All my time was spent wrestling, so I wasn't in the community with my friends there. And I had two people who just broke my heart that had backslidden. And they were on drugs, and then they'd gone back on drugs and stuff. And so I prayed a prayer. Now, you can ask God when you get to heaven whether He answered my prayer or not. I kind of think He did. It could have been a coincidence, but I personally don't think so. I said, Lord, I pray that if you don't want me to wrestle anymore, there was about a month and a half left of wrestling, I pray that I would get injured so I'd get out of wrestling. 2 days later, I broke my leg in a number of places. And I asked I was in the doctor's office, and he's doing all this stuff. And I said, am I going to be able to wrestle this weekend? And he says, well, you're not going to make weight with the cast up to your hip. So I don't think so. All the way up to my hip for 6 weeks. It was a bad thing. And so my mom got really mad at me because it was so itchy. I tore off half of the cast myself because I was 14, and you always know better than the doctor. But, I know. And so I jump off of a roof and break my leg. Now, that's probably the real reason I broke my leg, is you shouldn't jump off of roofs in a blizzard. But that's what I did. And I broke my leg. But it was when I broke my leg and I had time and I had solitude. I couldn't really go anywhere as a hassle. So all of a sudden, I grabbed a guitar and I started playing Lou, Skip to My Lou over and over and over again. And then that next week in Bible study, I had practiced enough that I could do a couple of worship songs that had 2 chords. And so I began leading worship at, I think I was about 14 years old, and playing that guitar. Solitude is good. Monotony is good. Everything that God can use in your life happens in the monotony of every day. Think about it. Your relationship with Him. It all happens in the monotony of every day, no matter how good of a preacher I am, and I am pretty great. But no matter how good I am, you will never grow with God if your experience with the Lord is only Sunday morning. It will never happen. There's no shortcut. I cannot inspire you into Jesus' arms. There's no shortcuts. There's no shortcuts. You've got to do it yourself. It's in the monotony. If you're here today and you're into health and things, it's the monotony of doing it every day. If you work out once every 2 weeks, it's not going to do anything for you. It's in the boredom of every day that everything good in your life happens. Some of you guys got some fantastic jobs that get to do some brilliant things. Well, it was the monotony. You had to learn those skills. And it was the monotony of having to go through those skills over and over again. Everything that is really good about your life came out as a result of monotony of the everyday. The relationships that are the most important to you comes out of the monotony of spending time with those people. Some of those are boring times with those people, right? Some of those are conflicts with those people. But the things that are the most important to you, it's born out of the everyday. But we completely neglect, and we're irritated by the everyday. We don't like the everyday. We want to think forward to the next vacation. We want to think backwards to our high school glorious wrestling years, which I didn't get because I quit. I'm not going to tell that story. I want to so bad. No, but in the monotony of every day, we don't like it, but it's there that we learn to be a man. We learn to be a woman. When no one else is wrong, nobody's there, nobody notices, and nobody even cares about what's going on. It's in that place that God wants to grow you. And it's in the monotony of every day. Because God is a God who doesn't change at a conference. He doesn't train at a conference. He doesn't train in out of a one-time shot. He trains with everyday life. Now, reality would about to strike in David's life. And that reality, of course, would be the Philistines now mustered their army, and they camp between Skoa and Judah, and Ezekiah and Ephraim. Ephesians. How do you say that one? Virginia. I should have practiced that word. Because even while we're doing the everyday stuff, the world is still happening. And we just don't know how God is beginning to connect dots. We just don't know. And we can't see it in the boredom and the monotony of the everyday. We can't see what God is doing. And we don't know the plan that God has, whether it's an 80-year plan like in Moses' case, whether it was a 40-year plan in David's case. He's about 40 years old when he finally became king of Israel. He's going to go through a whole lot before he becomes king. And all of those things that happen, it's the everyday that matters. And I want to encourage you that we shouldn't be squandering our everydays. When God is training, He is never in a rush. When God is training, He's never in a hurry. Because you really can't hurry training. I don't know, the way people learn, and I've studied this because when I was in school, learning for me was more difficult than some others in some ways. And have you ever had this experience happen where you're studying something, trying to get it, trying to memorize it, maybe trying to get your hands to learn how to do something, whether it was typing or playing the guitar, an instrument, or whatever it might be, and you're working on it, you're struggling with it, and then you walk away from it, and you come back, and I know this equated to the guitar. You work on a chord, you come back after a little while, and then all of a sudden, it's like a brain grew in your hand, or else it just stuck in your head, and it got easier in the interim. See, if you want to learn something, working on it for 2 hours straight is nowhere near as powerful as working on it multiple times for 10 minutes. Because your brain needs time to grow the neural pathways. That's science. So when God is training, it's in the everyday. He's never in a rush, because you can't rush it. You can't rush the good stuff. You can rush the bad stuff, right? That's kind of what the devil's deal is. He offers you something you can have now, but God's got something better. But the thing is, God doesn't rush. There's no shortcuts in the way he does it. Little things in lonely places train us for big things in God's plan. Little things in lonely places train us for big things in God's plan. And I don't know big things. What's big things? I don't know what big things are. A big thing for me is when somebody comes to know Christ that I've been praying for a long time. A big thing for me is a relationship where I get to swoop in and I get to bless somebody somehow, some way. But little things in little places, if I'm not the man God wants me to be when I'm all by myself, in solitude, if I'm not doing the everyday, I'm not going to be ready when that time comes. If you want to do big things, you've got to do little things well. We have the parable of the talents. And it's actually one of my more irritating parables in the scripture, because Jesus compliments somebody who's kind of dishonest, all right? He tells a story about a shrewd manager, and this manager is going to get fired. His boss comes up and says, well, I'm going to fire you in a little while, so give me a full account to everything you're doing. Has anyone ever done this to you? I saw this happen. Come to a person and say, hey, we're going to replace you. We'd like you to train your replacement, and we're going to fire you. That's basically what he says to the shrewd manager. You've had that happen? Yeah, I've just seen that happen before. Doesn't make for good. And so the shrewd manager, he says, well, I'll get you, you son of a gun. So he goes out to all of the guy's clients. He says, hey, you owe my boss $1,000. Just make it $500. Just scratch that off, because he figures I'm going to need friends later. I'm going to need friends later. And then he goes to the next one, and the next one, and he makes, and so he does all these little things to prepare the way, because there's going to come a day when he's going to need these people as friends. And Jesus compliments him. And so I read a bunch of commentaries, actually. We could unpack it further. But Jesus isn't complimenting his shrewdness, but Jesus boils the whole parable down to this verse right here. And it's Luke 16:10. If you're faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones. But if you're dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. If you are good at, he was saying what the manager did was good. What he was doing it was smart, because he was doing little things over here for future benefit. He was being faithful in those relationships, not the relationship he was supposed to. It's a weird parable. But it boils down to this principle. And we get in trouble. I've seen pastors make this mistake. Somebody comes in and they look really good, and maybe they can sing really well, or maybe they got a lot of charisma and they can do stuff, and they come in and they give that person a lot of leadership right away. And then the person doesn't show up, If you're faithful in little things, you'll be faithful in big things. And we make a big mistake, and this is a tip for your job. Make sure you see, if someone isn't consistent in little things, they're not going to be consistent in big things. If they're stealing paper clips at your work, don't put them in charge of the finances, okay? Because integrity goes, if you're faithful in little things, you're faithful in big things. If somebody is sloppy in one area, they'll be sloppy in other areas. And this is where David was faithful when he was in obscurity. And we have an opportunity to make a choice in our everyday. We can be faithful in our everyday. And what does that faithful look like? It means that we're intentional about pursuing God to the point of flow. In other words, every time I pick up my guitar, I don't get flow. Okay? It doesn't always happen. Every time you work on your truck, you don't get to flow every time, do you? I mean, even your favorite activity. But you pursue flow, okay? And if you don't, actually, that's why video games, that's the other side. Netflix, video games, Amazon, cable news, that is completely scientifically designed to do one thing, to get you in a unhealthy state of flow, a cheap state of flow. Because flow gives you dopamine. Dopamine feels good. You get in that place and you just feel better. And so our culture, and you can't blame them because it's capitalism, they're looking for every tiny way they possibly can to give you a flow experience, an experience where you lose yourself for a minute. And there's nothing evil about that. But every moment that you spend binge watching Netflix is time that you don't spend, like David, learning how to play an instrument so you can worship God. Or spending time praying to God and getting to know Him. Or, and this is the one that I want to end with today, that place that keeping you away from the relationships. Because remember what I said, it's the everyday that is ultimately the most important. But if you don't invest in the everyday, you never get the important stuff. And that everyday that I want to encourage you with is relationships. And my heart's desire is that you would, the Rock Church would be a hub for your best relationships. That if you've got good friends out there, that you'd be like, come to this place with me and be a part of it. I want your best friends in the world to be a part of our church. I want you to find your best friends in the world in this place, because we have to live together. And we can't do that unless we actually come together. You have to find room in the everyday for what's important. Otherwise, the culture will fill up your everyday. It'll be filled up with stuff that nobody ever lays on their deathbed and says, oh, man, I'm just going to miss Sean Hannity. You know? He just really speaks to me, and I wish I would have watched more Sean Hannity. Nobody ever is going to say that. No one is ever going to be laying on their deathbed and say, you know what, Stranger Things is coming out on Netflix July 4th, and I wish I would have watched more TV. No one ever says that. What do they say? I wish I'd spent more time with my family, with my friends. I wish I would have invested more. Life's best is in the everyday. But Satan wants to steal the best from you because he hates you and he wants to hurt you. And so, it's an insidious evil when we don't take the time to pursue God. And in David's case, he was out in the pasture. When I broke my leg, I was sitting in my basement without a lot to do. We only had 60 channels, and we couldn't DVR them when I was a kid. My kid will never know what it's not like to have DVR. Can you believe that? We have to be intentional. If you don't say, this is God's time, and this is my family's time, and this is my church friends' time, if you don't do that, you will fill that time with junk. You absolutely will. You have to think ahead and make a decision that this is a priority. Because there's going to come a day when you're not going to want to hang out with your church family. Because, for all kinds of reasons. I'm running out of time. Maybe you're just tired. Maybe you're just distracted, or maybe the preacher is terrible, or maybe whatever it might be. And so you pull back, but then when you need them, they're not there. You know, I a little while ago, it's tough. Or your relational family, your blood family, same thing. If you don't carve out time, this world would take all your time. The power is in the everyday. And so in a week, we're going to have a barbecue at my house. It's volunteer. As I look around this room, there's not one of you that couldn't be there. And so as every single one of you, I'd like to see you there at my house next week. Let me know your comments so I know how to prepare. And bring a chair, by the way. Be in the backyard. If it rains, we won't do it. But come be part of the family. And don't give up on us. Don't give up on us. And yeah, I wish I could talk more. But in a few weeks, we're going to be talking about David killing Goliath, and that's going to be a lot of fun. Next week, we're going to talk about David getting, scorned by everybody. And those are exciting because there's lots of drama. Next week, David's going to be anointed king. 2 weeks, he fights Goliath. But none of that happens if your everyday is wrong. None of the good stuff happens unless you get your everyday right. And I'll tell you what mine is. The first 2 hours of my day when I get up is for God. And actually, it goes over that most of the time. And I woke up this morning at it was 4, got up at 4:30, and spent an extended amount of time with the Lord before I went. Because if I don't do it first thing, I don't do it, And I just had incredible grace to do that. Now, you don't have to do it like me, and maybe 2 hours is too much to start with, and whatever. But what I am telling you is that you need to prioritize your relationship with God, because His Word says that if you seek God's kingdom above all else, He'll give you everything else. He'll give you everything you need. If you put Him first in your life. And actually, this Bible verse that we're looking at, I think it's still on the screen. Yeah, actually, Jesus is talking about money in this case. All scholars agree. If you're faithful with your money in little ways, you'll be faithful with money in big ways. But it's absolutely the same as time. It's absolutely the same as time and the energy that we put out. Would you close your eyes with me? Lord, I love you, and I thank you for this group of people who are here today. And I thank you for our family, Lord. And God, I pray that, I pray that we would grow. I pray that the good things would happen. We want to be a safe place for people. We're going to keep on just pushing in hard. But Lord, it really doesn't matter how good a job we do of getting people in here if we're not loving like you love. And God, I pray we do better at that. Help us to grow in that, Lord. And so, Lord, I pray, God, that a week from today at 5 o'clock at my house, Lord, that all of these folks would be there, Lord. And Lord, I pray the atmosphere would be laughing and fun and getting to know. And Lord, just realizing that we live life together. And that's where the power is. We never get to kill Goliath until we do the everyday well. So Lord, help me to do the everyday well. Help me to love well. Help me to seek you well. Help me to invest my time well. And God, I pray that you would help us and to not fill our lives so full of junk that there's no room for you. God, we want to seek you above everything else. In Jesus' name, we love you, Lord. Amen.
Jesus was a rock star.